This morning's session is guidelines for preparing a portfolio, and Kate Bowman and I are going to go through step by step on collecting material for a portfolio, what a portfolio is, and then guidelines for preparing the portfolio step by step in order to assist applicants to our program in the School of Architecture. So we say in this guidelines for preparing a portfolio that portfolios should not exceed more than 20 individual pieces of work. And the key is to do 3 or 4 projects, take multiple pictures of them, have descriptive labels, and really have the package be tight. So if you don't have 20 works, put in 15. If you do have 20, then these are some of the things that they could address. Art, if you draw well or paint or take photographs. So an example of that is something like this painting in watercolor. You could put the original, you could also scan it and send us a clear descriptive with a label. Music samples, we talked about CDs. So if you make a CD, if you make music, if you choreograph, these are dance, which often gets left out. People think I dance, but that's not part of it. Next one.
Any industrial design, product design, graphic design. So the t-shirt example, if you designed a chair or a stapler, photos of that, not so much the 3D object, but just taking really clear photos from different angles, up close of details, far away in context.
The next one was furniture design and furniture making or crafts. We said Lego is a really important one. Students often say they fell in love with architecture because of building with Lego in their basement, and you need to somehow describe and show that, or model building. I think the key in furniture, if it's something that small, it may be taking pictures of it. If it's something like this table, you want to take pictures, show the wood grain, did you sand it, what kind of corners are made on it, right? Is it mechanically fastened or not? That's the biggest tip, I think, for furniture making, to not just take one picture of the table, but to take its details. And then again, you have 4 or 5 or 6 works.
Even photos of the process and sketches early on.
Sketches are important too. So we'll come to that when we look at the big book. Writing samples.
Such as poetry, essays, novels, or criticism. If you've written an entire novel, you may not want to send that in. Of course, if you do, that's part of the graphic design again, much like the CD. You may just want to include an excerpt of your writing. Again, we'll show samples of that.
So writing is a piece of your creative work. People often think I write or I make music. That's not part of architecture. From our perspective, when you're looking at 300 portfolios, if that's your creative spark, that's what we want to see. So the next bullet says, drafting or perspective if you've done it before. So that's a tip there. Not to turn around and think you have to then go home to your kitchen and draw on the table your bedroom. That probably won't be a fine piece of work in the portfolio, especially if you have some other creative part that you make jewelry or you dance. So try to see your whole creative work and anything that you think has a creative talent or that you're in love with. If you put that in, it'll be the best way to present the portfolio.
And lastly, any multimedia art, such as videos, websites, game rendering, and again, that can come on CD or USB. Using a website link may not be the best way if we're looking through 200 and we have to wait for it to upload. Having the CD version and then also being sure to include a hard copy, just a screen capture in your website makes everything very clear.
Yeah, so when we look at a computer, if someone puts a flash drive or a CD in here, this one shows it clearly. You put the CD in, there's 4 folders. You can open each folder and see what the person's done, and they're clearly labeled. So each image isn't just labeled image number 1. It says a title like site strategy. It tells you what the creative walkthrough is on the drawing, and then when you click in each of those images from behind, then we have an image of the model that's shot on a black background, very easy to see and readable, and that way we can see 20 images on there in a way that lets you look at that and you don't have to go searching, right? The committee doesn't have time to go searching on websites or searching for links, so make sure that when you put things in that you've tested them before. Look at the things before you send them in, because if somehow you thought something went on a CD or a flash drive and it doesn't, then there's no recourse. We don't have time to contact people and say submit again.
Test it on different computers, test it at a friend's house, and actually have your friend go through it and make sure it's legible to them, that they understand it.
So in a portfolio, people often think it's the case, and I think this is an example of a portfolio that's bought at an art store, and it is the case indeed for the book that we'll finally get to. But before that, we might want to talk about the raw material for students to put into portfolio. We've said it should be creative. We've said it should show different aspects of your personality. It should be quite personal. So Kate and I now want to talk about some of the objects that are in front of us on the table that may give students an idea about what they're doing in their creative work. So if we start, this is an interesting one. It's a box. And if we're able to zoom in on this, it's a box made from Haida, people in BC, and it's one piece of wood. So it's a bent wood box. And this is the kind of thing that someone may do in a wood shop or make crafts, or their parents may do this kind of thing and they're inspired by it. Simple object, you put objects of sacredness in here, but in terms of the way it's made, if you look at this, it's made from one solid piece that's bent, and then this part is carved so it sits in there, so it's finely crafted. So that's one example.
Another example might be something people often overlook is if they do fashion design, clothing design, graphics. Elements in your portfolio might not just be two-dimensional, but if they were to be a T-shirt, for example, that you've designed and silk screened, jewelry that might be included.
Right, so that's an example of an architecture T-shirt that we made for Laurentian Architecture, and it has a graphic on both sides. And then the next version we did, which we don't have with us here, did another small logo of a turtle, which is the logo for the school on the shoulder. So those are all examples of being able to show your talents graphically.
And the two versions of the T-shirt, including both, is good because then it just shows an evolution of a design in different iterations. So it's a broader look at a project you might be working on.
Another one would be, of course, architects make drawings and models, but more like the furniture box. This is a plastic model of the Reichstag in Berlin, and it's made from one piece of plastic. That's the kind of thing you'll do later on in the school program. But I have seen many students who had a woodworking course again, or a portfolio course, or a life drawing course, where they're generating objects like this. So if you have this, you could either send that or something this size in with your portfolio. But I think what we'll get to is to talk about how to photograph those things, and that's a key piece. I've often seen things that are well made that don't get photographed properly, or the scan is poor, or they're not labeled. So one of the things we really want to emphasize is that whatever you make, you clearly label, write a text, explain what it's made from, you know, how you made it, in what course you made it. Is it a hobby or is it for a portfolio course? And those descriptions, as we get to the admission requirements, really help the committee look at things and be able to see your creative thinking behind it. Because today we're acting like the committee, right? You submit your portfolio, but rather than show a kind of how-to, we thought, once we're sitting there with 200 or 300 portfolios, these are the issues that you have to think about with us as an audience. So there you see that's clear. Let's look at this one.
If photography is one of your interests, showing, again, the clear images, having them labeled well. In this example, they're in a consistent format, so they're not turning all over the place, so it's very easy to flip through. There's some color, there's some black and white.
Right.
Some of them, the brightness or contrast is altered, so it's just another form of photography. It just takes it to the next level in some cases, and otherwise it's just going through a building and documenting what you see as an artist.
So in this example, it's really a sketchbook, so you could buy this again at most art stores, but it's a nice book, it's a good size. You can put that easily in a portfolio. Another thing that people often leave out, I know, is CDs. And if you make music in your life, these are two examples we brought here to show of a nice graphic package where the person made the music, but they also did a graphic for the cover, the front and the back cover, and when you open the CD, the graphic is also different than the cover, but you get a sense of a certain consistency in the graphic, in the color, in the line, and then you listen to the music. So in an example like this CD, music CD, you might have played in the band and then done the sound engineering and then done the graphics as opposed to 3 different people. And if that's the case, a descriptive text that comes along with this really shows in your portfolio. That counts for 3 different things according to this 20 piece of work. So it's not just the piece as a whole, it's breaking it down, writing descriptive text like you would to put captions on paintings or other things so that we know how the whole process unfolded. And again, it may be 2 or 3 pieces like this in the portfolio, and that's enough. So I have seen many examples of someone who made music and did graphics like this and then didn't think it was part of their architecture portfolio because they thought architecture portfolio means you have to draw your kitchen or draw the plan of a room. But these are all, in your terms, right, these are all things that show your creativity.
And it might not just be a CD of music, it might be a dance that you choreographed, or poetry that you're reading, or a film that you've made. So
Yeah. So all those two, right? If you write well, we say in here, if you write well, put it in. People think, oh, writing, I'm not applying to the English department, but in terms of architecture, again, this is a group that choreographed, made the music, did the graphics, and at one level, writing your song lyrics and putting them in a small portfolio would give the committee a chance to really see your strength.
without you being there. So again, going back to making the presentation very clear and understandable if you're 50 kilometers away, that we're sitting at a table and kind of get the full picture of who you are and what your interests are.
So these are some of the raw data that if you're putting in, raw material. If you do paintings like this one, this is part of a 3-piece, it was really meant to be, you said 7 pieces that would come together and form a circle, but each one of them is kind of finely painted in its own right, and then when you put them together, you start to get a sense of how they form a pattern, and they would eventually make a circle, and was it the seven deadly sins? So that's a theme in this piece. Now, again, do you send this in? This is one of the questions we're addressing in the guidelines. Do you send these 7 panels in, which get bulky, but also more importantly, if you want to apply to more than one school, you don't want to send your original works away necessarily to one place and then have to duplicate them for another. So one of the issues that I think people need to spend a lot of time on is taking any of these objects that are 3-dimensional and photographing them with real care. Like photograph them in a studio, photograph them against a backdrop, and try and present them clearly.
Yeah.
And that's one of the tasks of the portfolio. I've seen many good works of art that get presented poorly. Later someone shows you the original, and you can see as a committee that the original was strong and the graphic duplication wasn't. So it's not just throwing things into the case of the portfolio, it's really how you present the work in order to make it visually as strong as you can. You're making a case, right, to us as a group, and it may not be many objects, it may be that one piece, like when I looked at this CD, one piece and then listening to the music was enough to determine someone had real creativity.
That's right.
So in this portfolio case, it's a store-bought one, but it's nicely presented. It zips up to close. It's not too large. It allows works to be fairly big and mounted on background, and it can grow over time and have sheets inserted. So that's a good version. We might want to say something about if you make your case rather than buy it.
Well, that would just add to the portfolio as a whole if you decided to, instead of buying a store-bought case, but to show your creative side and actually make or fabricate your own. It would just enrich in your portfolio.
Yeah, and I've seen some beautiful cases because when that's made, again, that's a piece of your work. So it may contain the works, but it's also the work, and that gives a different feeling when the committee looks and sees someone took the care to make it.
It's really your first piece that is shown.
Yeah, and the first impression of the book as a whole.
Yeah.
So then should have a clear page, like this has a title page, the person's name, their address, and so on. But this title page is important to start it. In examples like this, it shows a set of cards. So again, someone might have done sketches and then made calling cards or Christmas cards. So that's a graphic way to show the multiple cards with the title page for the cards, and that came in a little box, and that's what the text that goes with this would explain. I think in this case, we spoke about a model and the way to photograph models to be clear and let us see not the 3-dimensional object, but with a drawing and a model. And this one also has the text.
Right.
Again, I think that's an important piece, Kate, right? We said that in every case, the description should really explain what it is, because you know what it is if you're the author.
That's right.
But how do we know what it is as the committee?
And it's a good exercise to show how succinct you can make the text. So instead of going on for many pages, having something very clear and to the point that's easily legible, that relates well to the model is equally as important.
Yeah, I think that's another point we said in the guidelines. A paragraph of text should be enough to explain something. You don't need pages. But again, graphically, if the text works like it does here with the drawing, then you get a sense of the page as a whole. This one is a cardboard chair exercise, and the sketches on the outside show the person's design process and thinking. Simple project, could happen in high school. And then you photograph your chair, and then you show that sitting with the other chairs and examples of your process. So that would work well. Here is an example of just photography and collage to be able to show things in color and what they look like when they're layered. This is another example of the same thing with color. This now fits with the graffiti part that we talked, right? Someone takes pictures in the city of a really attractive graffiti. They didn't make that piece, but the way they photographed it and the text of explaining why they take that in relation to a drawing, that can show us their process too.
And again, on this example of a photograph, just the clear label right at the bottom, perhaps that shows up in similar spots throughout the portfolio with a bit of consistency to it to make it that much easier to flip through.
Yeah, often with the title page, someone has a list of works like you would, right? So you write number 1 to 20 and you say what each piece is, and then you can flip back and forth as a committee
That's a good point.
and see what year the project happened in, what course, and so on. Again, more complex, but here's a model and photographed very nicely, the model as a whole, and then details. We spoke about that with furniture, details of the model. So by the time you look at this page, there's 7 images on one page. So 20 works doesn't mean 20 images, right? This page could be your page, but those 7 images explain the model as a whole. And what about the photography quality?
Again, it's very clear. It's from different angles. If this model is monochromatic to begin with, then the black and white photography works. If you do a piece that's very vibrant and very colorful, you would then want to consider taking pictures of it in color to really show its the full work.
But it's well lit, so that lets you see the contrast. And then again, sketchbooks we talked about, you could submit the whole sketchbook. This is a nice example of someone showing their sketches around a measure drawing, but you really get a sense of the way the person's thinking in design. And doodling. I think for many of you, if you doodle or keep sketches or doodle as you're in class making notes, those doodles have a power that show you, as an architect, we spend our lives doodling and doing sketches of things that then become developed into furniture pieces and buildings. So doodling is an important thing not to overlook. People often think the finished product is the thing to show, but in these 2 examples, the person's really showing their doodling, sketching as part of their process. And then lastly, I think when you do an image in color versus a model, these are 2 ways of showing, again, a kind of process, and a good color Xerox of that, or a JPEG, is the clearest way to show that. And then as we get to the end, finally, a sophisticated drawing like this one is still a perspective drawing. It's certainly not a drawing from somebody from high school. It's at the end of a thesis in this case. But the idea of doing the drawing that shows you a clear label, explains what it is, it's beautiful, it's careful. You could look at one piece like this and think that person takes care, and that's one of our key points, right? To show a creative spark and to show that whatever you make, show that you've put it together with care. Because as a committee, if we're looking, if we can see the person takes care in their work, that's a pretty good quality that then they're going to have in architecture school. So we've talked about the portfolio as a graphic piece, but now if we talk about it really as having 3 components, the graphic part, the statement of interest, and the letters of reference, as a whole, they're really the personal story, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and they have to be as clear and concise and thoughtful as possible because they're there representing you when you're not able to be part of the process.
Right, that's the thing. So since we're not having interviews where you can explain your book, we rely heavily on that statement of interest and the letters of reference as additional pieces that really tell who you are. So making it personal, I think for multiple cultures, Francophone culture, we want to know what is it in your culture that makes you who you are, right? And not to suppress those things and think that somehow you're becoming an architect, which doesn't include all of that. If you're First Nations or Métis or Inuit, we want to know, do you hunt and fish? Did you spend time with a grandparent learning those things? How do you situate yourself in nature? And all of those things, which don't seem like they're about architecture per se, really tell us who you are, where you got to this point, and then you may say, I really want to think about architecture and nature as an extension of that, as opposed to someone who says, I really want to look at downtown and kind of develop an urban strategy. So those things are important in terms of writing clearly and writing concisely about where you came from and including your personality. And then I guess the next piece of that, and it's more straightforward, the letters of reference, they are really talking about, if it's a teacher, how you've performed as a student. If it's a personal or a family friend, how they know you at a personal level. If you volunteered for an organization, we said we want to know what kind of volunteer or other interests you have and hobbies, because as you pursue those, they're about your character, right? So your overall character is not just your transcripts, it's your creative work, it's your personal story, and then it's a couple of people, we've said 2 letters of reference, in order to explain 2 or 3, in order to explain how you've performed. But transcripts will show academically how one performs. It's much more as a package now, the three parts, the portfolio, the letters of reference, and the statement of intent are really you telling your story. That's how I could say at the end of the day, a portfolio is a book about your story, where you're at till now in life, and then why that's a platform for wanting to study in a career of architecture.
And making it all as clear and concise as possible.
The statement shouldn't be the thing you write on the night before the portfolios do. Write it again a couple of times, have friends and family read it, and without losing its personal quality, try to write it as crisply and as clearly as possible. We hope this brief webinar has been helpful in terms of guidelines for preparing a portfolio and assisting you in graphically showing how the portfolio comes together with the statement of intent, the letters of reference, and your personal profile, which is the last important piece in the submission. We need to know your origins and your ethnic origins in order to run the tricultural program the way Laurentian is hoping to, in terms of teaching from different perspectives and different cultural backgrounds. We wish you good luck in putting your portfolio together and look forward to applications sometime in the winter. Thank you.